Good evening from Chicago. I'm Laura Ingraham, and welcome to the Ingraham Angle special, Trump's Week of Battles. President Trump is a fighter, there's no doubt about that, and it's a good thing because he's facing attacks on multiple fronts. And in the next hour, we're going to tell you how the media are putting stories out, some of them blatant lies, to undermine the president's agenda. Alan Dershowitz will be here to discuss Trump's latest fight with the Justice Department. You won't believe what we're learning about DOJ official Bruce Orr. Raymond Arroyo is here with his Friday Folly segment, where he's going to tell us of how the funeral of a music legend at times became a political rally. Plus, we've got updates about NFL players kneeling during the anthem and President Trump's efforts to remake the NAFTA agreement, all coming up. But first, our top story, CNN caught red-handed. As we've been telling you this week, CNN's blockbuster story last month about Michael Cohen was dead wrong. The network went wild with an anonymously sourced report that claimed Cohen was prepared to tell Mueller's team that President Trump knew in advance about that infamous 2016 Trump Tower meeting between Donald Trump Jr. and a Russian lawyer. We now know that CNN lied about Cohen's attorney, Lanny Davis, being a source for the piece. And here's the kicker. Davis now says the story is false. But still, CNN is sticking with its story. And Business Insider is reporting that the network isn't planning on revealing its alleged second source. And the left wonders why Trump's fake news narrative is working. Joining me now for reaction is the Federalist Molly Hemingway, who's also a Fox News contributor, Howie Kurtz, host of Fox News' Media Buzz, which airs at 11 a.m. on Sundays, and Dinesh D'Souza, a filmmaker whose new film, Death of a Nation, is in theaters now and will be in a special showing all weekend long over Labor Day. Dinesh, let's start with you here. This is wild. I mean, CNN is, this is CNN, the James Earl Jones booming voice. And at one time, like back in the 80s when CNN started, it was considered kind of a gold standard of this new type of journalism. Where does it stand now after this Lanny Davis story, complete bungle by the network?
Well, one can almost think back nostalgically to the 80s when CNN would have shows like Crossfire, where they would have a liberal, a conservative, Pat Buchanan on one side, Michael Kinsley on the other. That's not the CNN of today. Now, it's one thing to spin the news and interpret it in a manner that is consistent with your own ideological agenda. It's a completely different thing to have a story in which you are reporting facts. The facts are exposed as false, and you dig your heels in and say that they're true anyway. I mean, this is taking fake news to a new level, and it is setting, you may say, almost a new standard of deception that I think will haunt CNN for a while.
Yeah, Dinesh, your movie's Death of a Nation. This is like Death of Journalism. Howie Kurtz. I know all the cables compete with each other, and it can be pretty rough and tumble, and one side criticizes. I get that. But this is unbelievable. They claimed that they tried to, contact Lanny Davis initially with the story and that he declined to comment, but it turns out he was initially the source for the story. I mean, this story gets worse and worse the more people marinate on it.
Yeah, well, Lanny Davis has told me that he never confirmed this allegation for CNN, and then he's sort of outed himself as a source. Look, CNN is trying to defend the indefensible. It will not discuss on the air, will not discuss publicly what went wrong with the story about what Michael Cohen knew that Michael Cohen's lawyer now says is not true. And this one sentence, "we stand by our story" stuff, isn't working because the network is accusing the president of lying about his knowledge about that Trump Tower meeting. And I'll tell you one other thing, Laura. If the White House had done something like this, throw it out an incendiary charge and then stand by it as the story began to crumble, CNN and lots of other news organizations would be hammering the place for stonewalling.
Molly, and it's not just how they're stonewalling tonight. It's how damaging the particular allegation was that they ran with, apparently with some source they said was Lanny Davis, which ended up kind of not being Lanny Davis. So it's the underlying allegation about that Trump Tower meeting, which we know would have been at the crux of a Mueller investigation.
Well, they claimed it was a bombshell when they first reported this story, and as the story is falling apart, I think part of the reason why they're unable to take responsibility for flubbing the story is that they hyped it so much. But it's really part of a pattern of behavior for CNN as it relates to the Russia collusion conspiracy theory that they have been pushing for a year and a half. And there have been other stories that they claimed had multiple anonymous sources that also fell through. You would remember that they claimed that Don Jr. had advanced knowledge of a WikiLeaks dump. Well, they claimed they had multiple sources. It turned out not to be true, and they never explained how their multiple sources got it wrong. They also claimed that James Comey would contradict Donald Trump's testimony about how James Comey had told him 3 times he wasn't under investigation. Well, we all saw that testimony. He admitted that he had told President Trump that 3 times, just as President Trump said. They never explained how they got that wrong. And those are just 3 examples of many stories that they've gotten wrong about the Russia collusion theory.
Now, Dinesh, CNN is not the only network under fire for botching a huge story, getting it wrong. But according to now new reports, the top brass at NBC tried to put the kibosh on Ronan Farrow's real bombshell story about Harvey Weinstein's sexual predation. Basically forcing Ronan Farrow to take the story to the New Yorker magazine, where everybody knows by now he ultimately won a Pulitzer Prize. And tonight rumors are also swirling that NBC News chairman Andy Lack is on the hot seat. And this was after President Trump weighed in on NBC's troubles last night.
Remember the lines from NBC, which is probably worse than CNN?
Unreal.
Well,
Harvey Weinstein had a lot of power.
I think if the CNN story was a lie of commission, the NBC story is a lie of omission. Now, just think about how powerful their ideology would have to be, because remember, this is actually not a lie that would have helped Trump. This actually is a lie to cover up a principle, the principle of sexual harassment, the principle of sexual abuse, which is actually a principle on the left. And so, essentially, this principle can only be trumped by a greater principle on the left. And the greater principle on the left here is we have to protect our own team. They're very powerful people on the left, George Soros, Harvey Weinstein, and it is an unwritten rule, in a sense, of progressive journalism that these people are untouchable and that you have to run defense for them and run protection for them. I believe that was what was going on at NBC.
Yeah, he thought he was untouchable, and Harvey Weinstein thought everyone else was touchable. That's the problem here. Howie Kurtz, this is another wild story. Harvey Weinstein had an enormous amount of influence in Hollywood, enormous amount of political clout with all the fundraisers he hosted, the money he raised, and deep friendships within the Peacock. I mean, he and Andy Lack, I hear, were very good friends. What happened to the "we treat all women the same as men, we believe in women's rights"? And when this Ronan Farrow, young journalist, was hot on the trail of this story, General Counsel was saying, you better back off or we're going to smear you. Again, these are reported allegations by, I guess, the producer of Farrow's work.
Right. Well, that particular allegation is denied by NBC, and I don't know how much pressure Weinstein brought to bear, but it remains a huge embarrassment for NBC that after 8 months of research, it let Ronan Farrow walk out the door with that prize-winning story that essentially launched the Me Too movement. And now you have Farrow's investigative producer, who just left NBC saying this was a massive breach of journalistic integrity by NBC, that NBC was never enthusiastic about the story. NBC claims he didn't have enough, he never been willing to go on camera. But 2 months later, this meticulously reported piece appears in the New Yorker, and it looked like NBC just didn't have the guts to take on Harvey Weinstein.
Well, what's your gut on this, Howie? Do you think this producer is blowing smoke here? I mean, it sounds a little odd to me, doesn't it? Like, oh, he didn't have enough. They said today he didn't have enough sources. It wasn't well sourced enough. I think he was working on it, and they came down on him and said,
When you're a reporter, you know whether your bosses are enthusiastic, particularly about a sensitive investigative piece. NBC was not. NBC was willing to let him walk out the door, and so nothing can change the fact that NBC blew this one big time.
And Molly, before we let you go, this story also bled into Andrew Cuomo, because the report came out that He pulled back on an investigation into Weinstein, I guess after Weinstein's attorney gave a $25,000 donation. So it even bleeds into that part of the political world.
It's really clear that we see a lot of stories that get suppressed or elevated depending on political affiliations or friendships, and that's really inappropriate. We want to believe that our legal institutions and our media institutions will tell the story regardless of where it takes them, or apply justice regardless, and that is a problem that we're facing in this country right now with different standards for different people.
All right, we have one more topic, so we have time for that. One final topic. President Trump last night also shared his thoughts on the current censorship controversy with big tech.
Look at social media. It's a thing called free speech rights. You look at Google, Facebook, Twitter, and other social media giants, and I've made it clear that we as a country cannot tolerate political censorship, blacklisting, and rigged search results. And you know, it can go the other way also. We will not let large corporations silence conservative voices.
Well, the focus on this from President Trump and conservatives may be having an effect, with reports like this one from the New York Times stating that some Facebook employees are fighting against this intolerant liberal culture. Dinesh, you have written about this in books and spoken about this on college campuses. The West Coast, otherwise affectionately known as the left coast, especially in big tech, overwhelmingly left-wing, overwhelmingly probably voted for Hillary, and yet they say, oh, this is just an algorithm, you're all floating conspiracy theories. But now you got Facebook employees complaining about the monoculture.
This, I think, is very scary. So many conservatives fled to social media to escape the bias of the mainstream media, and now to discover this effort to sort of take people and make them into digital non-persons. I mean, one has to go back to Aldous Huxley or George Orwell to find out this kind of stuff going on. Now, a lot of people say, well, gee, these are private companies, they should be able to do whatever they want. But this is actually not true. If Google or Facebook decided, for example, we're going to shadow ban blacks, or we're going to shadow ban Latinos, these companies would be shut down overnight. They know that they can't do that, and they wouldn't even dare. But apparently with conservatives, they feel that it's okay to have political discrimination, even though I don't see fundamentally the difference here between, say, political discrimination and discrimination on any other basis.
Howie, how big of an issue is this? I mean, I can tell in my radio audience, it blows up the lines. Everyone wants to talk about it. Everyone seems to have an experience with it. I know that seems anecdotal, but I find Bing, by the way, Bing is the best search engine. There's the least bias in Bing. For whatever reason, that's what I've discovered. Howie.
Right. Well, it's a huge issue because social media is the new public square. And Facebook and Twitter both have acknowledged that they have a problem with instances of bias against conservatives. I think the evidence against Google is a little less clear. So President Trump and others on the right are obviously going to speak out about this, because if you don't, you can disappear if you don't show up in the search rankings or in the trending topics or whatever. But at the same time, I don't think government regulation is the answer. So there has to be another way.
Now, Molly, we talked about this earlier, that there's a thought that given the enormity of these corporations, and as Howie said and Dinesh pointed out, this is the public square today. This is what the equivalent of what we used to see in the old town square with people with a bullhorn. And so could there be a movement to treat them more like public utilities? So they have some quasi government oversight of these entities, or would that open up a total can of worms, perhaps in the other direction at some point?
I personally am not a fan of regulation as an answer to this situation, but these companies absolutely have sometimes huge market share, percentage of which would make Standard Oil blush. They are cognizant that they are going to make the government want to weigh in. Just because, though, they're not governmental entities does not mean that they aren't threats to free expression. In the same way that people get mad when President Trump criticizes the media because they claim that that's a threat to free expression, it's also a threat when big tech is telling people what they can and can't say.
All right, guys, thank you so much. And wild speculation becomes a media-manufactured frenzy over the Mueller investigation. If you've been watching other news anchors and pundits over the last day, you may think they sound like a bunch of kids on Christmas Eve. Now, why am I saying that?
You made it to Friday. It is the beginning of the Labor Day weekend, and talk heating up that special counsel Robert Mueller could drop an August surprise.
Axios looking at speculation over whether Bob Mueller may actually make some sort of an announcement today.
Hot speculation among the president's lawyers that today might be a day of action for Robert Mueller.
Well, today's not quite over yet, but it's a nice serving of wild, unsourced speculation on a Friday. Come on, guys. The news isn't that boring today. There's a lot happening. But are the president's critics grasping at any straws over the Mueller probe at this point? Joining us now to analyze is Alan Dershowitz, author of the big bestseller, The Case Against Impeaching Trump. We're also joined by Kendall Coffey, a former U.S. attorney. Great to see both of you. Professor Dershowitz, that is quite amusing. I've been hearing that it's coming, it's coming. There's something coming. I don't think Mueller's office is leaking anything. They've been pretty, they've been pretty tight. So is this just, a case of desperate wishful thinking on the part of the media?
Well, I think they thought that we're now 2 months away from the beginning, really, of the elections. And Justice Department regulations say you shouldn't have matters that might interfere with voting or interfere with the election or put a thumb on the scale of voting within 2 months. So this was a time when maybe something would have happened. But look, I think today what's happened is news reporting has become part of the adversary system. Kendall and I are used to the adversary system. He's one of the world's great lawyers. He was my lawyer, in fact. And he and I both understand the adversary system. One side presents its view of the facts. The other side presents its view of the facts. And then you have a judge or a jury decide. That's what's happening with journalism today, and wishful thinking substitutes often for careful analysis.
Kendall, we're going to play, we have a couple of different George Stephanopoulos sound bites. We'll play the second one, where again, he's this guy's been around for a while now. He used to work for the Clintons, obviously, but he's been around for a while. But this is what constitutes reporting today. Let's watch.
The New York Attorney General has filed suit against the Trump Foundation, which could lead to a criminal referral. The Manhattan District Attorney also considering charges against the Trump Organization. Trump facing lawsuits in Maryland and D.C. over the Constitution's Emoluments Clause. And, of course, Special Counsel Robert Mueller investigating possible collusion with Russia and obstruction of justice. The big question going forward, will any of these investigations lay the groundwork for impeachment proceedings in Congress?
Nothing's changed. Nothing's changed. And we're reporting it breathlessly like this is all new stuff. Kendall.
Yeah, I've never seen speculation become so intoxicating to the media. I have to say, by the way, as an aside, Alan Dershowitz is the greatest legal talent in America and a personal hero of mine. But I also
you guys are too much. You guys are too much.
Alan speaks for himself. He's magnificent. But let me talk about the election, because they're not supposed to drop bombshells on the midterm. Who knows if there's any bombshells to drop? And let's also recognize that the election is coming up very fast. If there was a 2-year standard, a 2-month standard years ago, early voting in Florida, pretty important state, starts around October 27th. Overseas absentees go out next month, and by October, beginning of October, domestic absentees go out. So I don't think there's any bombshells that they're rolling out anytime soon, but from the standpoint of avoiding interference with an election, I think the deadline is passed.
All right, Professor Dershowitz, the guy who's already in the middle of the Lanny Davis Trump Tower stories, anonymous source controversy, Jim Scudo, who I always mispronounce, he also weighed in on the speculation. Let's watch.
I mean, you use the term constitutional crisis, and that phrase has been uttered a number of times and warned about on a number of things. In this environment, though, would it really be received that way, right? Because arguably the president has shirked constitutional responsibility, certainly broken norms a number of times, frankly, without consequences.
Broken norms. Now we're at broken norms, Alan.
Well, you know, the system of checks and balances is working very, very effectively. The courts are striking down some executive orders, upholding some. The media is critical of the president, some supporting the president. The academy is generally putting pressure against the president. Churches, business, everybody's involved in checking and balancing everybody else Democracy is working. This is not a constitutional crisis. If the president is subpoenaed, he'll go to court. And if he goes to court, he may win, he may lose. And if he loses, he'll comply with the orders of the court. This is the way Madison had in mind when he created our awkward system of checks and balances, which was not designed to promote efficiency, but to avoid tyranny. It's working.
Well, Kendall, I'd say I'm not sure Madison had a special counsel in mind. I might beg to differ with the professor there. I don't know about that. To me, it seems like this has gone way beyond a check and a balance. Check and balance was impeachment and conviction in the Senate. I'm not sure a special counsel is what any of our framers intended, but I want to move on to another topic because I have you two gentlemen here. I'd like to get your thought on another Mueller-related tip. Two sources told Fox News' Catherine Herridge the DOJ's Bruce Orr kept a Mueller deputy in the loop about the anti-Trump Steele dossier. So, in other words, does that endanger Mueller's ethical standing? I'll go to Kendall on that.
Well, it's troubling, isn't it? I mean, if you think about, and whether it splashes over to Bob Mueller is a different question. But it's obvious that Bruce Orr's wife was working for a private company funded by Democrats. Some of my best friends are Democrats as it goes, but nevertheless, that is a glaring conflict of interest. And what interactions he had with others, which were frankly outside of his immediate duties as the director of OCDEP, which focuses on drug trafficking organizations, is also unclear. So it raises a lot of questions. DOJ, in my mind, has not done a satisfactory job of explaining it. They're really effective at investigating others, but when they go under the microscope, sometimes we don't get a lot of clarity.
All right, Alan, at the end of the week here, any more thoughts on Bruce Orr? It was a closed-door testimony this week, but his name has been occupying a lot of airtime for obvious reasons with his connection with Christopher Steele. His wife, of course, works at Fusion GPS. You know the drill.
Well, I was prepared to give Bruce Orr the presumption of innocence. He was a student at Harvard Law School. Everybody tells me he's a really good guy. And the thing that really put me away from, or maybe overcame, the pure presumption of innocence is the presence of his wife at a lunch or breakfast or whatever it was meeting where obviously he was trying to obtain information in an official capacity and his wife was working for a private company. I do think that the Inspector General now has to really look into that relationship, and I trust the Inspector General. I think he's one of the very few people who comes away from all of this looking very good, and I would leave it to the Inspector General to give us a thorough investigation, a good answer as to the relationship between Bruce Orr, his wife, the company, the Democrats, the Justice Department. It's very complicated.
All right, gentlemen, thank you so much. And a musical legend's funeral turning political? And Ryan Gosling setting off a huge controversy.
Live from America's News headquarters, I'm Marianne Rafferty. John lying in state in the Capitol Rotunda. The Arizona senator is just the Live from America's News headquarters, I'm Marianne Rafferty. John lying in state in the Capitol Rotunda. The Arizona senator is just the 30th person in the nation's history to receive this honor, joining a distinguished list that includes Presidents Abraham Lincoln, John F. Kennedy, and Ronald Reagan. Members of Congress gave tribute during today's ceremony, after which members of the public were also allowed to pay their respects. President Trump pushing for a new deal with Canada, but negotiations with Canada are off to a rocky start. The Toronto Star today saying it was given off-the-record remarks from President Trump where he said he refused to compromise with Canada. President Trump called the leak a serious violation, but added that at least Canada knows where it stands. I'm Marianne Rafferty. Now back to the Ingram angle.
It's Friday, and you know what that means. Ryan Gosling's new Neil Armstrong biopic has set off a huge controversy, and a boycott is underway. For more on that and the political edge of Aretha Franklin's funeral, we're joined by New York Times bestselling author of the Will Wilder series and Fox News contributor Raymond Arroyo. Now, Ryan Gosling, Raymond, he's such just an affable, seemingly nice guy, and sounds like such an interesting biopic, astronaut. Why could this be possibly in any way cantankerous or controversial?
Laura, they decided not to show Neil Armstrong planting the American flag on the moon, which is, of course, a fact of his life. Now, their reasoning for doing this, Gosling says in an interview around the Venice Film Festival, is this, and we'll put it up on the screen. He says, I think this was widely regarded in the end as a human achievement, and that's how we chose to view it. So I don't think that Neil viewed himself as an American hero. From my interviews with his family and people that knew him, it was quite the opposite, and we wanted the film to reflect Neil. Now, I don't understand how planting a flag on the moon in any way contradicts his being a humble hero or being reluctant to embrace that moniker as a hero. But
it's another way of trashing. It's another way of trashing patriotism. It's another way of moving beyond the nationalism or nationalistic spirit, fervor of the moment. And Chuck Yeager tweeted out, Raymond, who obviously knew Neil Armstrong well. He basically, threw some water on what Gosling said that he wouldn't like the flag he mentioned. He didn't consider it an American achievement. It's ridiculous.
My feeling is if you're doing a biopic, stick to the facts. He planted an American flag, plant an American flag. Now there's a boycott movement, a hashtag boycott First Man movement, and this thing is sparking all sorts of outrage, and it's not even out yet.
Yeah. What's that on his space outfit there? I think that's American flag. Yeah, Chuck Yeager said, not the Chuck I knew. Basically, just complete. He's 95 years old, and he still had it in him. Yeah, look at that flag on his astronaut uniform there. Come on. All right, Raymond, what else is happening? We had kind of dueling funerals today. It was something on television. You had the John McCain funeral, and then you had the memorial service. It was lying in state at the Capitol. Then you had the Aretha Franklin funeral in Detroit.
Well, look, two great Americans, a musical legend, a statesman, both being honored. But both these events, in some ways, particularly Aretha Franklin's funeral, turned very political. Here is Al Sharpton at the Queen of Soul's funeral in Detroit.
You know, the other Sunday on my show, I misspelled respect. And a lot of y'all corrected me. Now I want y'all to help me correct President Trump to teach him what it means. When word went out that Miss Franklin passed, Trump said she used to work for me. No, she used to perform for you. She worked for us.
I don't know why they have to politicize everything, but we see this across American life. People just want to turn sports. Now even the great celebration of a life, a musical legend, the Queen of Soul, it's being twisted and turned into a political rally.
Now,
I think this should have been left out.
No, this was so gratuitous. And you again, Aretha Franklin, one of the great American voices of all time. I mean, didn't she get an award from George W. Bush? I guess she was a Democrat, but she didn't seem like an overtly political person. Maybe I missed that. Maybe I wasn't aware of that, but it just seemed completely out of step. And then you had Farrakhan up on stage. You had obviously Jesse Jackson, but Farrakhan was an interesting person to have there on the same stage as Bill Clinton and other luminaries.
Well, Ariana Grande took the stage, Shaka Khan. I mean, this was The Voice meets Showtime at the Apollo. It was unbelievable. Everybody trying to top one another. And as you said, it was a rather interesting backdrop to Ariana Grande. And it looks like Farrakhan and Bill Clinton got quite an eyeful. But here's my larger problem with this. Rather than focus on the individual whose life is being celebrated, it turns into everybody elbowing each other to get their moment on the stage. Even Maxine Waters managed to barge into this celebration. Watch.
The congresswoman who has been attacked like never before. But she's a strong black woman. Congresswoman Maxine Waters from Southside LA, South Central. Everybody just point over there. Tell her we got your back. Come on, say it till everybody hear you out there. We got your back.
But Maxine doing the Wakanda salute there from Black Panther. So everybody got their moment in the spotlight. You know, Laura, my problem with this is both of these funerals have become television events, multi-venues, star-studded lineups. They really are made for TV events. And my concern is we're going to see people ahead of time booking the rights to their own funeral so that, you know, the networks can get in it. You know, Netflix announces Cher's funeral. They've got the exclusive right. I mean, I don't see how this serves the end of celebrating a life and bringing people together. We're using great lives to divide Americans, and that's not good.
Some mean person on Facebook, someone sent me this, said something like, Aretha Franklin's funeral memorial service was so great that it's been picked up for 10 episodes on Netflix. I almost fell over. Like, okay, I guess it was on 4 or 5 hours, but my goodness, it was star-studded and it did get political. 6 hours, that's all. Okay. And Raymond, thanks so much. And as the NFL season prepares to kick off, there's new data on just how many Americans side with President Trump over the national anthem protests. Why it should send chills through the league. Now,
I know you well. You love our country. You're proud of our history. And you always respect our great American flag. We are standing up for the heroes who protect America. We are proudly standing up for our national anthem.
Well, that was President Trump in Evansville, Indiana last night. And when the NFL season is ready to kick off, national anthem protests are yet again taking center field, pun intended. The league has plenty of reason to be concerned. A new Wall Street Journal NBC News poll finds that 54% of voters think that kneeling during the anthem is not appropriate. And that's compared to 43% who say it's a fair way to protest racial inequality. Joining me now with their reactions, Kevin Jackson is an author and a Fox News contributor, and Antoine Seawright is a Democratic strategist. Gentlemen, it's great to see you tonight. Antoine, let's start with you. The numbers aren't hugely, disparate there. I mean, a majority saying the national anthem, kneeling, not appropriate. But there's a sizable number of people who say it's fine, doesn't really bother them. It's not clear that this is probably good ultimately for NFL viewership, though, Antoine. I tell you, I'm ready to go to the Notre Dame game, tomorrow night. And college football is where it's at. I'm sorry. NFL football, I just know a lot of people who are just not all that jazzed on it. And I think this is part of the reason, even if it's not intended to be disrespectful to the military, a lot of military veterans do feel that way. And I think that ends up hurting the whole experience for just a lot of folks.
Well, Laura, a couple of things. I think sometimes what gets lost in the conversation is why this even started. This started because Kaepernick felt like black and brown people were mistreated at the hands of law enforcement. That's number one. Number two, when you look at polls, and I'll take this scenario or any other scenario where people are being surveyed, it's all about how the question is asked, who's doing the asking, and how the question is being framed. But if you look at the NFL and you look at the bottom line, their revenue numbers, their revenues increased by 5% last year, not to mention the $50 million Amazon deal for streaming that was signed. And so while these people may say they may not agree with the protests, I tend to believe that they still will watch the NFL. And football, like any other sport, is one of the very few things that most people, Democrats, Republicans, black or white, rich and poor, agree on. I just hate it's turned into a political football, no pun intended.
Yeah, well, Kevin, I think I don't think anyone's trying to make it political. I think
the president is, Laura.
Yeah, well, no, I think the president is standing up for what he believes in, which is just like the other folks who were kneeling. They're kneeling for what they believe in, and the president's standing up for what he believes. I mean, you can't have it one way and say, well, this whole side gets to do this, but the president can't talk about what he believes. Kevin, your thoughts on this?
As Jerry Glanville said one time, NFL is going to stand for not for long. He can quote all the numbers and statistics he wants. The NFL is in triage. And I don't know why they're on this self-defeating path, but they like being on it. And it reminds me of what the Democrats are doing and going against Donald Trump in many ways.
Oh, here we go.
At the end of the day, here we go. You're exactly right. Here we go. When you look at what's going on with what Donald Trump is standing up for, the flag, he's standing up for veterans. By the way, he's also standing up for police. And when I've got a film coming out called Bleeding Blue, and one of the police in there says, hey, when something happens in your neighborhood, you're going to call a cop or you're going to call Colin Kaepernick. And he's exactly right. Listen. Police are going to have to do their jobs. And Colin Kaepernick, whether he likes it or not, he started a trend that show, and Laura, I don't know what the statistics are, but I'll tell you, the overwhelming number of Americans believe in the flag, believe in the anthem, believe in standing for him, and believe in the military and believe in the police.
You can take a knee in protest, but also stand up for believing in America and everything she stands for.
Take a knee in protest for people killed in Chicago.
Again, I'll say. You could focus on why this even started. The fact that African Americans, black and brown people, are 5 times more likely to mishandle or killed at the hand of law enforcement than any other race. This is why it started. And so while you can say that these people are not pro-American, look, my father served in the military. My father served so that these players can have the right to take their knee.
More black people are killed by other black people than cops. And you can argue this as much as you want. Randy Moss wore a tie to get inducted into the NFL Hall of Fame, and it had 12 black people's names on it that expanded over a decade. This idea that cops are out hunting and killing black people is ridiculous.
No one ever said they were out hunting and killing black people. I said they were mishandled at the hands of law enforcement. Statistics will prove that to be true.
All right, we got to move on. We got other topic we want to hit. I have you both here. So I want to get your reaction to this. Last night, CNN's Don Lemon took a pretty nasty shot at Kanye West over Kanye's support for President Trump. Watch.
It's like a word salad where you realize that Kanye West, entitled to his own opinion, but is not very bright and not very when it comes, I'm talking about this issue, not overall, but when it comes to these issues, he's not clued in. He needs to read about it before he speaks about it. I'm not saying he's not a bright person. I take that back. That's not what I meant. But I meant when it comes to this particular issue, he needs to look at a book, read some history, and understand what he's talking about.
I mean, that's pretty condescending coming from Don Lemon, who himself has had a few wobbly moments. Let's watch.
You don't want to hear I love you too, but we really don't need to see what's about to happen here.
No, Don.
I love you, Don. No, keep it close.
We're good.
Okay, I'm cutting you off after this one. Should I cut him off?
A lot of people have been asking about that, about black holes and on and on and on and all of these conspiracy theories. Let's look at this. Noah says, what else can you think about? Black hole, Bermuda Triangle. And then Deji says, just like the movie Lost. And of course, they're also referencing the Twilight Zone, which has a very similar plot. That's what people are saying. I know it's preposterous, but is it preposterous?
He was talking in that last soundbite about the Malaysian jet that disappeared, crashed, but couldn't find could have been pulled up by a black hole. I mean, I guess. I'm being charitable tonight, I guess. Let's go to you, Kevin.
You don't have to have Don Lemon being drunk to showcase his lunacy. Just watch his program any night. And the idea, Laura,
because you don't agree with him.
No, you know what? I don't agree with you, but you're sitting here and I'm not interrupting you. Look, at the end of the day, when you look at what he said about Kanye West, he's trying to correct a grown man who dare have an opinion that differs from his. And oh, by the way, Donald Lemon, Kanye happens to be right. There are many reasons for us to be looking at Donald Trump and through the prism, and certainly as black folks, to be looking at Donald Trump as a person who's done a lot more for blacks than Barack Obama. And for blacks not to want to admit this, and for Don Lemon and this particular gentleman to keep talking about Donald Trump as if he's some bad guy, or Kanye West, who's bringing in what we're calling the Kanye effect, is ridiculous. More black people are waking up because of Kanye West and his comments, because they're tired of being demonized, because they want a different way to go about this.
Yeah, I mean, Laura, that sounds all good. What Don Lemon did, he corrected his statement.
Yes. Yeah, I know, but I'm going to interrupt him like he did me, Laura.
What Don Lemons corrected was Kanye's position. And Kanye even apologized and walked it back, his comments about enslavement a couple of days ago on a national radio show, because he was actually wrong. And I appreciate him walking his comments back. Look, I am not for criticizing someone for having an opinion, because we all have them. But just make sure make sure when you speak of a certain instance, make sure that the facts are very, very clear. And I'm glad that Kanye West was able to be man enough to walk back his comments.
All right, we got to roll, guys. Thanks so much for joining us tonight. I have a question, though. Is President Trump about to prove his naysayers wrong and score a huge victory for America? Well,
I know you well. You love our country. You're proud of our history, and you always respect